What is your I finally met my online friend horror story? He and I were part of the same forum many, many years ago. He was dealing with his issues and I was dealing with mine. I think we both went there to just, escape where people wouldn't judge, also because we were bored. I'm not quite sure when we got properly talking, but I think it's when he told me a terrible joke about kipper ties. We used to share everything with each other over MSN. I'd give him advice about his love life and he'd listen to all my screw ups. It took quite a few screw ups before we eventually met up. I think I already knew we were in love, but seeing him in person really cemented it. We decided to give it a go, even though we lived 300 miles away from each other. We had a lot of ups and downs. I was distant, and he lived with his ex girlfriend for a bit, even though she didn't have a job and couldn't afford her half of the rent. The same ex girlfriend who I'd given him advice on, who he had nicknamed Trouble, and liked to claim she was pregnant every so often. We got over that, along with many other things, and finally moved in with each other. I thought our issues were going to be solved when there was no distance between us, but in the end, we were just very different people who wanted very different things, and the distance wasn't going to change that. We broke up after 3.5 years together. None of that's a horror story, not the way he treated me, not the fact he probably cheated on me, and not that I wasn't a priority and used to cry myself to sleep. About 1.5 years after breaking up, he gets back in touch and we talk like it was in the beginning when we were friends. After a few weeks, he asked if I wanted to get back together. I said no. I told him that he'd broken my heart again. The next day, I got a phone call from his work because I was still his emergency contact, asking me if I knew where he was because he hadn't turned up. The police got in touch too. And the last phone call that day was from his mom to let me know that he had ended himself. Oh, that's really terrible, and I hope you don't feel too guilty for it. You were not at fault in any way, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. I hope you're doing all right. Story 2. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years, and I have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I just couldn't cope with. So he picks me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep into their nostrils. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed if he was just trying to sneak one out before I noticed. And if he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed at all, so I relaxed a little. I guess maybe he was just so confident about himself and our friendship that he'd ascended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick booger. Fine, sure. When I finally looked at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day, I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car or the table or wherever it was that we had stopped at. I realized I was being transported into a rolling booger shrine and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I just had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He was a nice dude, but I wound up rolling out of our visit early because I just couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack, it was all I could not do to throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I do still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it just didn't feel like it was my place, you know? Story 3. Flashback 15 years ago. I was talking to a person online I'd known for a few years. We weren't best friends, but we did talk every day. Seemed like a nice enough guy. At some point, he asked where I was from, and I mentioned that I lived in Philly and I was going to the Art Institute there, living in the dorms. I didn't give specifics other than that. Most people knew I was an art student at the time anyway. I posted about it regularly on LiveJournal. A few days later, I come home from class and I see a message on AIM. Figured out where you live. I'm outside of the dorms at the cafe across the street. Meet me. So this guy lived on the West Coast, and after finding out where I lived, he made an unannounced trip across the country, tracked down the building where I lived in, and was camped out at the cafe across the street, asking me to meet him. And all of this without any heads up at all whatsoever. So I, of course, immediately felt uncomfortable and didn't really know what to do. It's one thing to meet up, another thing entirely to make a trip across the country and camp out in front of a person's residence. I didn't answer the AIM message right away, and I needed some time to calm down and think and, get more rational as best as I could. More messages started coming through, each reading slightly more hostile than the last. Okay, this guy traveled all this way. It'd be a jerk move to ignore him, but at the same time, I felt like I was seeing red flags everywhere. I was legitimately creeped out. More messages came, and each time they started to get more agitated, more impatient. He started asking for my class schedule so he could meet me outside class, asking where I'd be going, where I usually ate, and what time my dinner schedule was. He started getting weirdly specific about wanting to know every facet of my life. I was getting like full on stalker vibes from this guy, so I lied and told him that I was visiting my sister and that I'd be back over the weekend and I just miss him. And that's when he said, "That's fine, I can wait." And he did. 3 days later, the dude still there, still messaging me that he's still at the cafe, still waiting. What the hell are you waiting for? I'm thinking, like, why are you even here? Why didn't you even at least tell me you were coming? My privacy was having huge issues with all of this, and it got to the point I started feeling legitimately scared. So I made a decision. Rather than meet him, I'd log out of AIM, create a new handle, pretend I never existed at that point. I completely abandoned my live journal because of him and started posting under a new name and went so far as to change my entire online persona. I never heard from him again. Story 4. I was on Meet Me, and I met this guy who was super cool. We ended up texting every single day, and I took the train out to Los Angeles to meet him. When I got there, he was being a buzzkill, and he told me that he hadn't gotten much sleep because he was partying last night until 5 a.m. And then we walked to his house, and when I walked into his room, I was kind of shocked. It was an 8x6x5 room, and all he had was a mat on the floor and a small little jewelry box full of mementos on top of his suitcase of clothes. We took a nap together, and then later we went to get ramen, and he asked me to pay, and I didn't mind. We went back to his place, and we listened to music while we waited to go to a party. Fast forward to that night, we met up with some of his friends, and they were so mean to him. They kept roasting him and picking on him, and he was visibly getting upset. I stopped him for a bit so his friends could walk ahead of us. I reminded him that it was all fun and games and just to ignore them. Ended up at the party, and lots of people knew him. I sat out on the patio with a few cool people that I had just met while I waited for my friend to come back from saying hello to everyone inside, and he never did come back. I was outside on the patio with these strangers for like 3 hours. People kept coming up to me and asking if I was all right. I decay if I look sad or if I just look like a plain loner. I went to find him and it was so packed. I didn't see him, so I walked back. I saw his roommate and asked him to please tell my friend that I was going to go get a motel. He went to tell him, came back and said my friend was being a jerk and he could walk me back to the house instead, so I didn't have to spend money on a hotel. And then we get to the house and I thanked him for walking all the way back home with me. I really appreciated it as my friend was probably inside doing illegal substances or getting with girls. I went to bed in my friend's room and he woke me up in the middle of the night kissing me, trying to get his freak on. I simply said, "No, I'm not interested." His exact words were, "Are you serious? What was the point of you coming here? It's such a waste of time." My feelings then were really hurt. I went back to sleep, woke up and left. Never wrote to him after that. He had texted me a month later asking to borrow $50. I simply ignored the message and moved on. Whoa, wait, what kind of guy is this? And he is like the human equivalent of a skid mark. Story 5. I, 25, was best friends with a woman, 46, for nearly 6 years. We would talk for hours and send each other gifts constantly. We shared everything from art to personal trauma. We were very close. When I fell on hard times, she was very kind and offered to take me in. I was so grateful that she would do this for me. And after a few months, things started to change. I started to see why she was such a lonely person. She was mean, if not cruel, to anyone who ever disagreed with her or even had a different opinion. She was so mentally unstable that she couldn't even buy something without having to call her elderly mother and ask for permission. I found out that she was scamming the disability services to get money from the government because she didn't want her mother tracking her spending. She was so horrible to her caregiver too. I'll admit that the guy was a complete moron, but he was still a sweet guy that was just trying to help. She was so cruel towards him that I had to step in on multiple occasions, which she freaking hated because it meant I wasn't on her side. That's when she turned on me. She began to freak out over small stuff, screaming and crying because I missed a spot while mopping or because I spilled a little bit of water in the kitchen or ate my food too fast. She was freaking insane, like all caps. And as soon as I realized how messed up and unstable she was after being screamed at and chased back to my room, I told her that I was going to be moving out as soon as possible. So for the next week, she decided to make my life a living hell. She would scream about me to other people on the phone, telling lies about me, saying I did things I never even did. And because she was a YouTuber with a big following, she doxed me on social media, telling people I punched holes in her walls and keyed her car. She even called the cops and tried to get me arrested for things I didn't do. Her followers began to pester me, sending me threats. Then she started posting and sharing all of my personal secrets that I had shared with her in confidence. I eventually ended up having to call my family to come get me because she was wanting to keep my dog so that I would have to keep in contact with her, and I was just no longer feeling safe. So after 6 months of living in hell and 3 years of internet aggravation and stalking that followed, I'll never ever meet someone I met online ever again. I have no interest at all whatsoever in online friends. It's just not safe because you never know how absolutely messed up someone is until it's too late. Holy crap, dude, that is some seriously, absolutely, almost nearly unbelievable scary stuff. I hope he turned her fraudulent bum in for scamming. People like her make it harder for the ones who really need the services to get help. And if you agree that the internet is a scary place, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more outrageous stories like this one. There are always good lessons to learn from. Let's go ahead and go on to the next story. Story 6. Long story short, when I was doing a lot of online dating, I did have multiple accounts across multiple platforms, and one of them happened to be FetLife. I used pictures there that I hadn't put online before with my face cropped out. It didn't pan out, however. I didn't really like any of the guys that messaged me. I was polite to them all, but ultimately kind of abandoned my profile. Cue Tinder, and I matched with a guy that looks white-collar, tailored, professional, just the good stuff, and just my type. We matched, talked for a week or so until we decided to get drinks. And I get to the bar, took an Uber there, and look around. I don't see him. Until this scraggly-looking guy comes up to me and says, "Oh, hey, Grenadine Garden. I thought you'd never make it." Now, I'm not usually one to judge by appearances. We all have rough days, and Lord knows I don't wear makeup or do my hair on the busiest of them. But his hair was significantly longer. Think short, well-manicured hair versus mid-back-length uncombed waves. He was covered in a patchy beard and dressed really badly. I honestly didn't recognize him, and he waved it off with, "Sorry, those pictures are kinda old." Red flag, stupidly ignored. We grab a small table with a huge chair and start drinking and talking. One drink, just to be polite, but I'm already turned off at this point, wholly. Then here comes the kicker. He leans in towards me, puts his hand on my thigh, and says, "After you didn't message me back on FetLife, I'm surprised we matched on Tinder. You really are quite beautiful." And at this point, I'm like, "What? I'm sorry, what?" He chuckles, literally chuckles like a villain in a movie, pats my thigh, and says, "I'm going to the bathroom. You should look at your profile and figure it out. I found you because your body is quite distinct. It's worth noting we live in a major international tourist city. There are thousands upon thousands of new people here every day, especially on Tinder. And this is not some small town. I used to match with people that would swipe between connecting flights, so I'm beyond nervous watching him get up and go, and I quickly checked my FetLife inbox, and lo and behold, he had messaged me months ago. His profile picture looked like an absolute serial killer. I remember why I rejected him. Incompatible on all fronts. I was polite. So anyways, I got to use the whole angel shot protocol, in which I basically ran to the bartender, explained the situation, and left through the back door. I was just beyond uncomfortable. I then deleted all of my social media for a few months, and I consider myself lucky that he only sent a few obscene messages for the rest of the evening, but gave up after that. And I paid for my own drink too. I'm not a monster. Story 7. After college ended, I was playing a game called Eve online. I was in a corporation with a dude who I thought was the coolest. He had sold crap in-game for real-world money and had built a supercomputer. He had a smoking hot girlfriend and had pictures of them rock climbing, doing some super cool stuff. He was also like a head chef where he worked, and since I was a chef as well, I had a little bit of a bromo crush on him. He told me after I graduated that he could hook me up with a manager job, and all I had to do was move up there. So I sold everything I owned that day at a pawn shop and bought a U-Haul and started driving. 1 hour before I got there, it was like a week-long drive, he called me and told me the job was no longer available and I shouldn't come. When he found out how close I was, he said to just come anyways. So when I get there, I'm completely blown away. They lived in a disgusting Section 8 apartment with 4 other people and a 1-bedroom apartment. They had like 3 cats, which I'm allergic to, and a kid as well. Day 1, it was all illegal substances and partying. I did not partake. I was not enthused at all. Day 2, I went into the city looking for a crappy job to survive. I got one. It was crap. Day 3, my quote-unquote buddy tells me we're all moving out and into a nice apartment. Week 3, we actually move into a new apartment, and the first night in that apartment, he starts roughing up his smoking hot girl in front of their kid. The second time he did that to her, I called the cops. Him and his girl immediately said I was the bad guy and that they were just loving each other. They had the cops escort me from the apartment, so there I was, 1,700 miles away from home, homeless at 2 a.m., and it's frickin' raining on all of my stuff. Lars, you are a sack of crap, and I hope you die of space or. How someone could make such a huge decision in one day, though, based on the promises of someone met online, is beyond me, but damn, that still sucks. Story 8. So this happened when dial-up was at its prime. I was young, self-destructive, and I couldn't care less. I just wanted to meet new people and have fun. I joined a chat room and ended up finding someone who lived in my smallish town. We chatted for 6 months before agreeing to meet up. I knew he was like 30-something, and at the time I thought he cared like a brother or a dad figure. I didn't know. It was just nice to be able to talk to someone who seemed like they cared about me. So we decided to meet up for coffee one day. We agreed to meet up at night a couple of days later. The whole time leading up to it, he was saying he was nervous and scared. I couldn't figure out why he would be scared or nervous. And then he picks me up a block away from the house. First red flag I actually noticed. I get into the car and realize he is one of my brother's high school teachers. I'd met this guy before at an open house and he was really nice, so I put the red flag on pause. We kind of laughed that we had met before and didn't realize it. As we were talking, he passed by the coffee place and he says instead that I have a better place in mind, so he drives us out 15 miles outside of town in a country-like area and then pulls over. Now, this area of town was rarely ever populated by moving traffic. We were alone and there was no way out. And at this point, I knew what was going to happen. I thought to myself, great, now I'm an after-school special. He said that my top was really nice. He began to kiss me and held my hands down with force. So you guys can imagine what happened after that. He was kind about it, as kind as this situation could be, until I got up the courage to say no. Then he turned into a monster. I thought he would leave me for dead on the side of the road, and after it was over, a wave of remorse hit him. He apologized for getting so rough, and he begged me not to ruin his life. I promised that I would never say a word to anyone and that I wanted it. He said he needed to hear me say it. I wanted it. It was pure survival mode at that point. I would have said anything to get out of there alive. Once he felt reassured I wouldn't tell, he helped me get cleaned up. I was a bloody mess and dropped me off a block away from home. So that's my horror story. Do not trust people you meet off the internet. Story 9. Back during WoW's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I had become friends with, mostly through other friends. We talked more and more over time and became fairly close. He had this a-hole roommate, and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during a raid. He'd scream and throw fits, and he was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but also verbally and sometimes physically cruel too. I had my own apartment, so I said, you know what, come stay with me. Just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe. He shows up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job either. He sat in my apartment day after day, eating my food, slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually, I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing the whole time. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off of. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him, I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. And as far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly, I do not care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. It's the first and the last time I do anything like that. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and I also hope you learned a few lessons about meeting people online. And if you made it this far, I'm sure you're also going to enjoy the next one, what it's like to have a psychopath friend. Story 3 is ridiculously shocking. I'll see you in that video, and of course, thank you for watching this one.